Okay, so today's video is quite a personal one. I have been offline for quite a while and I really want to explain to you, my followers, why. And I'm sorry if you've missed me, but I've been going through some very, very intense personal experiences and I just didn't have it in me. It takes a lot of work and a lot of real inner strength to make these videos. People don't really understand how much work there is behind each video that's put out on social media. And I just didn't have it in me to make these videos. So today I want to give a little bit, share a little bit of what I went through, because I think that people who live with what we call today ultra processed food use disorder, or what some people call food addiction or sugar addiction, or people who are just really, really struggling with unhealthy eating patterns and are in recovery from that or striving to be in recovery from that. I think that my personal experience living in what I call sugar-free recovery for over 30 years, maybe my personal experience can help you, and maybe also help you identify and hopefully give you some hope also, because this has been a very difficult period. It started with the war with Iran, where bombs were falling on us all the time at in the middle of the night, and the tension was very, very hard. But together with that, my mother has been very, very ill. She was terminally ill for the last 2.5 years, but the last 3 or 4 months of her life, and she passed away exactly a month ago. Today is her shloshim, or the 30th day, which is quite a milestone in the Jewish ritual of mourning. And before she passed away, there were 3 or 4 really, really intense months where she was very, very ill, but she hadn't yet passed away. And it really took a toll on me personally. And then 2.5 weeks after my mother passed away, a new granddaughter was born. So there we go, circle of life. Emotional roller coaster for sure. And I want to share with you how all these experiences affected my eating and how I dealt with it as somebody who has this automatic tendency to turn to food for anything, for solace, for celebration, for emotional stabilization, or just because I feel like it or I'm craving it or things like that. The fact that I've been living in abstaining from sugar and flour and virtually all ultra processed foods doesn't mean my food has been perfect. And also, it doesn't mean that I never look to food like for when it comes to my automatic brain that tells me eat something, you'll feel better, is still working. It's still there. Those pathways are still the way there. Even though abstaining from the foods that work like drugs on my brain has definitely made those pathways in my brain go from a huge highway of 6 lanes in each direction to maybe a 2-lane highway, or sometimes even there's periods in my life where it's just this like dirt road that barely anything can pass through it, but it's still there. And I have to remember that, and I have to act accordingly and think accordingly. And this really is something that is something that I think about all the time, and it is a priority in my life, because I don't want to go back to the place where I was before 30 years ago, when it was like totally out of control eating, binging, feeling horrible and hating myself and knowing better and not being able to control it in any way, which made me really miserable and suffer. So I want to share with you what happened. So especially in the last, let's say, 2 months, when my mother was really, it took her a really long time to move on to the next world. And it was really, really straining and hard for me to see my mother like that. And also it meant a lot of preoccupation with it. There was a lot to do. There was a lot to think about regarding her care. And also like this waiting, like, just feeling like in limbo, like she's really nearing death, but she's not dead. And how do you do? How do you continue? How do you function? How do you live? What do you plan? What do you don't plan? This really was emotionally really, really difficult, together with all the stuff that's happening in my country. So, in Israel. So, here's the thing. I'm not going to tell you that I never turned to food for solace or for relief or something like that. It did happen. But in my sugar-free recovery, I coach my clients that there's this, I call it the GPS to sugar-free. It's like this map how to live in sugar-free recovery. And the GPS is for groundwork, food pillars, the 4 food principles, and strategies, support, and tools that help this make it into a way of life and a long-term thing. And I want to show you how in this period of my life, I applied the GPS to sugar-free map. Okay, so first of all, the knowledge that I have about how food, this is the groundwork, okay, or the knowledge, this is the base. The groundwork that I have, that knowing that if I turn to ice cream or chocolates or all this like sugary junk food, for me, it's like the sweets is like the real, heroin type of foods for me. If I turn to the sweet stuff, to the sweet junk, I know where it's going to start. I have no idea where it's going to end. And it could really throw me back into total misery. And so if I was miserable anyway because of my mom, this would have just made it worse. And it would have meant also that I know that I wouldn't have been able to handle things as well. It would have really, really hampered and harmed the way I deal with things in my relations to other people, in my functioning, day-to-day functioning, in how do I deal with my family, working with my sister together on my mother's terminal illness, and having also a father who's very elderly and needs care at the same time. So I knew that because I know how these foods work on my brain and what it does to me, after really educating myself for many, many years, there was no way I was going to go back to them. This knowledge was a game changer for me when I learned it, 10, 12 years ago. Since then, I have not gone back to these foods. And then we have the 4 food principles. So sugar and flour were not an option. I'm not going to tell you that I never ate any of what I call the yellow light foods, right? There's the red light foods that are really not an option, so it's not a problem. There are the green light foods that I know I eat them, I feel good, I feel healthy, they're nutritious for me and good for me. And there's the yellow light foods that aren't really so great for me, but sometimes it happens that I do go back to them, or I'm not willing to put them on my red light list, or in some situations I can handle them in control. And one of the foods that I've really been struggling with for the past few years, for example, is nuts, because they're so easy, right? First of all, they're healthy, they're nutritious, natural nuts, almonds, walnuts, pecans, they're nutritious, they're easy. You can take them anywhere. They're always around. They're always around my house because my husband doesn't eat junk food either. So basically that's his snacks, and he's not a food addict. So to tell you that I never ate nuts, or never even went emotionally to eating something, felt like I had to eat something just to relieve this pressure, inner pressure inside, I would be lying if I said I did that. But I was always, first of all, I'm so happy to say it wasn't this sort of uncontrolled binging and binging and binging and binging. There were episodes of overeating. There were lapses in my abstinence, especially when it comes to foods that maybe don't have sugar and flour, but they're not foods that I know how to control well, like nuts. And let's face it, if you eat a lot, you gain weight. And I'm happy to say that one of the results I can say from going through this period is I didn't gain, I haven't weighed myself, but I didn't gain an amount of weight that my clothes don't fit or things like that. Just like everybody else, I'd like to lose a few kilo and maybe, and I do know that I need now a period of intense work on my own recovery, my 12-step recovery, to get really back aligned in it. And this is the other thing that I want to share. So let's go back to that. There have been times when I lapsed into emotional eating, or I took back certain foods that I let go of them because I know that I shouldn't be consuming them, foods or beverages, etc. But when it did happen, instead of making this huge tragedy out of it and fighting it and feeling, oh, I'm such a failure because look at me and I'm this like food addiction, uh, counselor, and here I am like eating nuts when I said I don't eat nuts. No, it wasn't like that. First of all, I'm always honest with my clients, and the truth is, most of my clients really appreciate the fact that I'm human too, and they don't feel like they have to live up to this like ideal that's unattainable. And I always say it can happen. Lapses can happen. And what I did do is brushed off the dust, kept moving forward, and did my best to use these as a learning opportunity, and did the changes that I could in order to prevent it from happening again, or maybe lessening the intensity or the frequency of it happening again. There were things that I just did my best at the time with the inner resources that I had, which were much more depleted than they are usually. And that's the other thing that I want to talk about, is that because my inner resources were depleted, maybe there were things that I knew I could do or I should do that could make these lapses less frequent, or in order to really stay away from nuts, which is my ideal, which is what I try to do on a general basis. I'm just using them as an example because that's a trigger food for me that sometimes is hard for me to stay away from completely. But everybody has their own food substance, maybe that would be. And what I realized is that, well, my sponsor from OA once said this to me: sometimes you just need to be in the know. And being in the know means just being honest with myself and saying, at this point in time, this is not doable for me. I can't do this. So this like sort of coming down on myself that I haven't been perfectly abstinent from a trigger food like nuts, which is not good for me, but does not send me off the bend like a chocolate bar would, or ice cream. Well, then be in the know, or like I said, that I know that I need to do some intense recovery work on my 12-step program now in order to really feel that really great recovery that I know, that I'm not feeling yet, and that I want, and I know. But right now, I don't have the inner resources to do it, but I know that it's on my to-do list. I know it's going to happen, and I even know more or less when it's going to happen, when is the right time for me. And now to be in the know, to recognize that this is what I can do right now. This is the best I can do right now, and it's good enough. Sometimes good enough is just good enough. And if I'm off the really hard drug foods for me, and I'm not binging my brains out, and and I'm not constantly 24/7 obsessed with what am I going to eat and how much am I going to eat? Did I eat? Blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to tell you that there's no food chatter in my brain at all, and the food chatter is a little louder in this last period than it's been before, but it's not anywhere near what it was. And this is also what I tell my clients always, if there's a time where there's a certain regress, just remember the delta, remember where you've come from, remember what the zero, or going back to zero, really, really is. And for me, it's like there's no comparison to the way I was living when I was like deep in my addiction and in my use as food like a drug. So this is how I really want to share my own personal experience with you guys, that, even though I am a experienced food addiction counselor and I've brought many, many people into a life-changing experience, I too sometimes experience hardship. And then we just need to do the best we can. I've never met anybody who went into amazing ultra-processed food use disorder recovery from coming down on themselves really, really hard and just negative talk and just feeling like a failure and concentrating on the failure. So what I've been doing for myself is exactly the same thing that I recommend to my clients, which is focusing on what I'm doing well, because when I focus on what I'm doing well, that will motivate me to do even more. And here I am, back to making videos online. For example, this is a great example of how, okay, now my inner resources are starting to come back, and I'm starting to do the things that I used to do that make me feel great, like sharing my knowledge, like hopefully helping, even if it's one person who's suffering with sugar addiction or ultra processed food use disorder, as we call it, to heal, to recover, then this video has been worth it. So put in your comments below. If you've gone through a hard period in the past, how have you dealt with it within your recovery program? And thank you very much for listening. May we hear only good news, and I will see you in our next video. Bye-bye.